The wind had been lying all evening. It had started soft, a low, aching moan through the spruce trees at the edge of Eli Calloway's property. And he'd ridden out anyway, because 40 head of Angus cattle didn't care about weather, and neither, really, did he. But somewhere between the eastern pasture and the tree line, the sky had changed its mind completely. The temperature dropped 12 degrees in under an hour. The snow stopped drifting and started driving near horizontal sheets of it that turned the world into a wall of white noise, and Eli's horse, Duke, had gone from easy-gaited to skittish in the time it took a man to blink. Eli didn't fight him. Duke was 17 years old and smarter than most men Eli knew. When the horse slowed and tossed his head, nostrils flaring toward the dark cluster of ponderosa pines to the left of the trail, Eli let him stop. "What is it?" he said quietly. Not a question, more like an invitation. Duke stepped sideways, snorted again. His breath came out in great clouds that the wind immediately tore apart. Eli squinted into the dark. The snow was thick enough that his lantern barely made a dent in it, but something at the base of the trees caught the light and held it, a shape that didn't fit the landscape. Not a down branch, not a deer. He dismounted. The snow was past his boot tops by the time he reached the tree line, and the cold was the kind that had teeth. He held the lantern out in front of him, and his heart, that carefully guarded long quiet thing, did something it hadn't done in years. It lurched. She was curled against the base of a ponderosa pine like she'd been trying to become part of it. A woman, young. Her coat was the kind of wool that looked expensive, but wasn't designed for Wyoming winters, and it was soaked through. Her dark hair was plastered to her face. Her lips had gone a color that made Eli move faster than he'd moved in a long time. She was also, unmistakably, heavily pregnant. He crouched down and said gently, "Ma'am." Her eyes flew open, and then she screamed. Not a startled scream, a cornered scream. The kind that comes from somewhere deep in the body, somewhere that's been trained to expect the worst when a man gets close. She scrambled backward into the tree trunk, arms wrapped around her belly, and the sound she made was so raw and so afraid that Eli sat back on his heels immediately and held up both hands. "I'm not going to touch you," he said. His voice came out lower, slower than usual. "My name is Eli Calloway. I own the ranch about a mile east of here. You're going to freeze to death if you stay out here." She was staring at him with eyes that were wild with fear, but also, he could see it even through the terror, with intelligence. She was assessing him, calculating risk. "Please," she said. Her voice was barely more than a thread. "Please don't." "Don't what?" Her mouth opened and closed. The wind drove a gust of snow between them, and she flinched from it the way she'd flinched from him. "Whatever you're afraid I'll do," Eli said. "I won't do it. I just need to get you warm. You and the baby." Something happened in her face when he said the baby. A crack. Something that wanted to believe him and was terrified of the wanting. "I can't, I don't." She was shaking so violently the words stuttered out of her. "I don't have anywhere to go." "You do now," he said. "If you'll let me help you up." She looked at his hands. He kept them exactly where they were, palms out, still, no sudden movements. The way you'd approach a mare that had been badly handled. It took another full minute. The longest minute of his recent life, crouched in the snow, while the storm tried its best to bury them both. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were so cold he could barely feel them. He got her onto Duke by standing behind her and keeping both hands on her waist just long enough to lift her, and then he stepped back and took the reins and walked. He didn't try to ride. He kept himself at Duke's shoulder where she could see him, where she could watch his hands on the leather and know where they were at all times. She didn't say anything for the length of that mile. Neither did he. The storm howled around them, and Eli kept walking, steady and unhurried. And somewhere in the middle of that walk he heard her start to cry, quietly, miserably, the way people cry when they've been holding it too long and the body just gives up. He didn't tell her to stop. He didn't offer hollow comfort. He just kept walking. His house came out of the blizzard like a lantern. That's what it looked like to him in those moments, the lit windows warm and amber against all that white violence, something solid and real in the middle of chaos. When he helped her down in the barn, more carefully this time, watching her face for any sign that she'd bolt, he noticed three things. Her left cheekbone was slightly swollen, the kind of old swelling that was days into its fading. She was wearing a wedding ring she kept turning around with her thumb, over and over, like she was thinking about taking it off. And when he accidentally grazed her arm through her coat, she made a sound so small he almost didn't hear it, a catching of breath, a bracing, the sound of someone who had learned that touch meant pain. Eli filed all three things away and said nothing. He just brought her inside. His housekeeper, May, had gone home before the storm broke, so it was just Eli in the big ranch house that had been designed for a family he'd never had. He put her in the chair closest to the fireplace and went to work building it up without asking her anything. Heat first, questions later. Or maybe never, that wasn't his call. She sat in the chair and dripped melted snow onto his rug and stared at the fire like she was trying to remember what warmth felt like from the inside. He brought her a blanket and draped it over her shoulders without touching her. She whispered, "Thank you." He went to the kitchen and came back with soup he'd made 2 days ago, a habit he developed living alone, making big batches of things that kept. He set the bowl on the side table next to her, not in her hands. She looked at the soup, then at him. "I'm Clara," she said. "Eli, I know. You said." A pause. "How far along does it look like I am?" "I'm not a doctor, but I'd say close." Her hand moved to her belly. The gesture was so tender, so instinctive, that something in his chest did that unfamiliar lurching thing again. "I'm 37 weeks," she said. "I think. I haven't seen a doctor in a while." He kept his expression neutral. He was very good at that. "There's a doctor in Crestwood. 20 minutes when the roads are clear. We'll get you there as soon as the storm breaks." "Okay." Her voice was small. Then, like she'd been trained to say it, "I'm sorry for the trouble." Eli looked at her for a moment. "You're not trouble," he said. "Eat the soup before it gets cold." She fell asleep in the chair before she finished the soup. He put a second blanket over her and left the fire burning low, and went to the kitchen to stand at the window and watch the storm and let himself think through all the things he was carefully not asking. A pregnant woman alone in a blizzard at night, wearing a coat that cost more than some men made in a month, with bruises fading at her cheekbone and fear in her eyes at the sight of a man's hands. Running from something. Running from someone. He thought about his mother. He thought about the way she'd looked the morning she'd finally left. The specific kind of tired that doesn't live in the body, but in the spirit. The way she'd kept apologizing to everyone for taking up space. He didn't think about that often, but he thought about it now. Then he put on coffee and went to check on the cattle. She slept for 14 hours. He knew because he checked twice quietly, standing in the doorway to the guest room where he'd eventually moved her. She'd startled awake in the chair around midnight, disoriented and gasping, and he'd stood at the far end of the hall and said, "Guest room's ready if you want it," and she'd looked at the hallway and at him for a long moment before she'd walked past him, giving him as wide a berth as the hall allowed, and gone inside and shut the door. He'd heard the lock turn. He didn't mind. He put extra blankets outside the door and went to bed and listened to the storm finish what it had to say and blow itself out before dawn. In the morning, the world was white and silent, and she was still locked in the guest room. He made breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, and left a plate outside her door. He knocked once, said breakfast outside the door, and walked away before she opened it. He was on the porch when he heard her pick it up. This became the pattern of the first 3 days. He fed her through the door. He made sure the fireplaces were stocked. He cleared the snow from the paths. He didn't knock on her door unless it was to tell her something specific. "Roads cleared. Doctor can see you Thursday." And then he walked away and let her answer in her own time. On the third day, he found her in the kitchen. She was standing at the window with a cup of his coffee, wearing an oversized flannel shirt she must have found in the closet, his from years ago, over her clothes. She turned when he came in, and the flash of fear was immediate and then, a second later, visibly managed. She breathed through it. He watched her do it and kept his distance and went straight to the coffee pot. "Morning," he said. "Good morning." Her voice was stronger than it had been in the storm. She had color in her face now. The swelling at her cheekbone had faded to almost nothing. "I hope it's okay." The shirt. "I was cold and I didn't." "It's fine," he said. "You can take anything you need from the house." "I mean that." She looked at him like she was waiting for the condition attached to that. When none came, she looked back out the window. "The roads are clear," he said. "Like I said, doctor's in Crestwood. I can drive you, or I can call someone else to take you if you'd rather." She was quiet for a moment. "You can take me." He nodded. He poured his coffee and leaned against the counter, and they stood in the kitchen together with 6 feet of space between them, and it was comfortable enough. For a first time. "I'm not going back to Boston," she said, abruptly, like she'd been holding the sentence, and suddenly needed it out of her mouth. "Okay," he said. "You're not going to ask why?" "No." She looked at him, really looked at him, in a way she'd been avoiding up until that moment, scanning his face for something, some sign of the hook in the offer. He let her look. "Why not?" she asked. "Because you'll tell me what you want me to know when you're ready," he said. "And everything else is your business." Clara set her coffee cup down on the counter. Her hand was trembling very slightly. "My husband," she stopped. Started again. "His name is Robert. He'll be looking for me." Eli took a slow sip of his coffee. "Is he dangerous?" The pause before she answered was its own answer. "Yes," she finally said. "Then we'll deal with that when the time comes," he said. "Right now we need to get you to the doctor." She blinked. "That's it? That's your reaction? What reaction were you expecting?" "I don't know." More questions. Or, telling me it's not your problem. Or, she stopped herself. The apology was already forming on her face. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for saying that. I'm sorry for taking up space." "You don't have to apologize," he said before she got the chance. "This is your problem, and I'm making it mine because I want to. There's no other reason." She looked like she didn't quite know what to do with that. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he agreed. "Finish your coffee. We'll leave in 20 minutes. Dr. Anita Vasquez was 60 years old, sharp-eyed, and had been delivering babies in Crestwood County for 30 years. She examined Clara without hurry and without judgment, and when she came out to the waiting room where Eli was sitting with his hat in his hands, she gave him a look that contained a volume of information. "She's healthy," she said. "Baby's healthy. Measuring perfectly for 37 weeks. A pause. "She's got some old bruising on her ribs. Healed. And a scar on her left forearm that's not from any accident." Eli said nothing. "She told me she left a difficult situation," Dr. Vasquez said. She seemed embarrassed to say more than that. "She doesn't have to be embarrassed," Eli said. "No," said the doctor. "She doesn't." She studied him for a moment. "She'll need weekly check-ins for the next 2 weeks. Then she could go sooner than that. She's staying with you. For as long as she needs." The doctor nodded slowly. "She's going to need someone calm," she said. "Stress is hard on late-term pregnancy. She seems wound very tight." "I know," he said. "I'll take care of it." On the drive back, Clara sat in the passenger seat and stared out at the snow-draped mountains and said, without turning to look at him, "Dr. Vasquez said you asked about bruising." "She told you that." "She told me what she told you." A pause. "You didn't ask me about it. It wasn't my place to ask." "You could have." "I didn't want to," he said. "Knowing doesn't change anything. You're safe now. That's what matters." Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable. More like something settling. "You shouldn't have to earn kindness," she said softly. It came out like she was reciting something she was only starting to believe. "That's what Dr. Vasquez said to me." "She's a smart woman," Eli said. Clara turned to look at him, then really look at him, for the second time. He kept his eyes on the road, but he felt her looking. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He thought about it honestly before he answered. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago," he said. "And because I can." She turned back to the window. But when they pulled into the ranch drive and he glanced over, he saw that she was pressing the tips of her fingers against her lips, very gently, the way people do when they're trying not to let themselves cry. He pretended not to notice. He was good at that too. March came in soft, which Wyoming rarely did. Clara had been at the ranch for 2.5 weeks, and the house had changed in ways that Eli couldn't entirely quantify, but felt clearly. A warmth that wasn't just the fireplaces, a sense of presence in rooms that had been empty too long. He heard her moving through the house in the mornings before he came in from the barn. He caught himself listening for her. He noticed the small changes in her. The way she stopped bracing every time he came into her room she was already in. The way she'd started leaving her door open at night instead of locked. The way she'd started finishing her sentences without that habitual pause, that tiny intake of breath that he'd come to recognize as her checking herself. Is this okay to say? Will this make him angry? Should I take it back? She still did it sometimes. Probably always would, to some degree, but less. He left her small things without saying anything about them. A pair of wool socks that would fit over swollen ankles. A book he thought she might like. He'd noticed the way she'd looked at his shelves. The softest throw blanket he'd owned, moved from the living room to the foot of the guest bed. She never mentioned any of it directly. But one morning he came in from the barn and found a pot of fresh coffee waiting, and a note on the counter that just said thank you in small, careful handwriting. He put the note in his shirt pocket. He didn't know why. He just did. The panic attack happened on a Tuesday, in the middle of the afternoon. He was fixing the fence at the south pasture, and he came back to find her on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, arms wrapped around her belly, breathing in shallow, ragged bursts. She'd knocked a mug off the counter, and it had shattered, and she was surrounded by the pieces, and she couldn't stop the shaking. He stepped over the broken mug and crouched down about 4 feet away from her. Not close. Not crowding. Clara, he said, you're in my kitchen in Wyoming. You're safe. Her eyes found his. The panic was animal level, somewhere beneath language. Count with me, he said, in that same calm, unhurried voice. Ready? 1. 1, she managed. 2. 2. They counted to 10. Then they counted back from 10. Then she was crying, not the terrified kind, the relief kind. And he just stayed where he was, 4 feet away, and let her. When she was through, she pressed her hands against her eyes and said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I heard a truck on the road, and I thought it was... Clara. What? Stop apologizing. A hiccuped, watery sound that was almost a laugh. I can't help it. I know, he said. But you've got nothing to be sorry for. He helped her up, carefully, her hand in his, nothing more. And then he swept up the broken mug and made her tea, and sat at the kitchen table while she sat across from it. And he talked about the cattle. Not because it was fascinating, but because normal things said in a normal voice were sometimes the most effective medicine. She listened, and slowly the color came back to her face, and her breathing steadied. He used to do it on purpose, she said, out of nowhere. Slam doors. Move things when I wasn't looking. Come up behind me. She said it like she was reading from a document. Precise, detached. Like if she kept the emotion out of the facts would be manageable. Not always something you could point to. Just always on edge. Always waiting. That's by design, Eli said. Men like that. They want you off balance. Easier to control. She looked at him. You know about it. My mother, he said simply. He didn't offer more than that. But something passed between them in the silence. A recognition. Someone else who has seen this up close. Someone who understands. I didn't think I could leave, she said. For a long time, I really didn't think I could. But you did. I did. Her hand went to her belly again. That tender, instinctive gesture. I wasn't going to let him. She stopped. You don't have to say it, Eli said. I know. She looked at him steadily. But I want to. She took a breath. I wasn't going to let him do to her what he did to me. The word her sat between them, warm and new. Her, Eli said. Clara smiled, her first real unguarded smile, and it was the kind that changed her whole face. Dr. Vasquez confirmed it last week. A girl. Congratulations, he said. And he meant it the way he meant most things, simply and completely. He built the nursery while she was sleeping. He hadn't planned it as a project. He'd started by going to Morrison's hardware store in Crestwood for a bag of nails and come home with lumber, white paint, and a crib kit that the girl at the register had helped him pick out. He'd worked at night 2 hours at a time, keeping it quiet. The room next to the guest room had been a storage room for a decade and a half. Boxes of his dead father's accounting ledgers, old saddle equipment, things that needed to go away. He moved it all out. He painted the walls a pale cream. He put together the crib from the instructions, which took 3 evenings and a degree of patience he'd previously reserved for difficult horses. He put up a small shelf. He found a rocking chair in the attic that had been his mother's. He hadn't meant for Clara to see it until it was finished. But she'd gotten up in the night for water. She told him later, the insomnia of late pregnancy, everything uncomfortable, and seen the light under the door and opened it. He was on his knees with the last piece of the crib when he heard her in the doorway. He looked up. She wasn't saying anything. She was standing in the doorway in a robe with her hair loose and her hand pressed over her mouth, and her eyes were full, completely full, overflowing. "It's not done yet," he said. "I was going to tell you when." "Eli, the chair was my mother's," he said. "I thought you might want." "Eli," her voice broke on his name, just barely. "Nobody has ever," she stopped, pressed her hand harder against her mouth, breathed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "I want to." She lowered her hand. Her eyes were streaming quietly, and she wasn't apologizing for it. "Thank you. Just thank you." He stood up from the floor and looked at her across the small room and said, "She's going to need a safe place to start." "She already has one," Clara whispered. He nodded once slowly, and then he picked up his tools and said good night and went to bed. And he lay in the dark for a long time with his heart beating in the unfamiliar way it had taken to doing lately, and didn't try to figure out what it meant. Robert's first call came on a Thursday morning. Clara had gone white the moment her phone rang. She'd been using it only for Dr. Vasquez's appointment confirmations, had been afraid to use it at all, and she'd looked at the screen and made a sound like someone stepping on broken glass, soft and involuntary. Eli was at the counter. He didn't move toward her. She let it ring 4 times. Then she answered. He couldn't hear Robert's voice clearly from where he stood, only the tone of it, which was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. No shouting, just a low, even, composed voice that went on for nearly a minute without stopping. Clara said, "Robert," once and was talked over. She said, "I'm not," and was talked over again. When she finally lowered the phone, her face had gone to marble. Something locked up behind her eyes in a way that made Eli feel cold. "He hired investigators," she said. "He knows I'm in Wyoming." "How specific?" "Just Wyoming." She sat down heavily. "He said he's not angry. He said he just wants me to come home, so we can." She stopped. "He said the words work through this. Like this is a rough patch." Eli set down his coffee mug. "What does he want?" "The baby." Her voice was flat and sure. "He wants the baby. He's not going to let me. He said if I pursue divorce, he'll take her. He has better lawyers." "He has." She pressed her fingers against her temples. "He always wins, Eli. He always wins because he has the money and the connections and the—" "Clara." She looked at him. "Does he know about this ranch?" "My name?" "Not yet." "Okay." He reached for his phone. "I'm going to call someone." "Who?" "My lawyer," he said. "James Whitmore. He's the best in the state, and he owes me a favor from 15 years ago that I've never collected." He met her eyes. "He'll know what to do. Can I tell him everything?" She hesitated for only a moment. Then she nodded. "Good," Eli said. "And Clara, he has better lawyers than him. I promise you that." She stared at him. "Why would you do that? Why would you spend your—" "Because it's the right thing." His voice was even, not dramatic, just true. "And because no man should be able to use money as a weapon against the mother of his child. That's not how this works. Not here." She looked like she was trying to find the catch. She was still looking for it. She might always be looking for it, for a while. He knew that. He didn't push. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." He stepped out onto the porch to call James and stayed there, low voice, while the winter sun came through the trees and the horses moved in the pasture and the world went about its business like it always did, indifferent to crises it couldn't see. The second call came 6 days later, and it was worse. Robert had gotten closer. He had Wyoming. He had a town. He didn't have the ranch yet, but Clara could hear it in his voice, the way it had shifted from come home to something colder. Something with a current under it. "You're making this very embarrassing," he said. She had it on speaker, James Whitmore's instruction. "Document everything. You know how I feel about public scenes." "Robert, I've spoken to the hospital. Dr. Vasquez has been notified that she'll be hearing from my legal team regarding patient privacy violations." Clara went white. "She didn't violate anything," Clara said. Gee, I'm sure that's true, Robert said pleasantly. But investigations take time, don't they? And they're so unpleasant for everyone involved. Eli, standing at the kitchen counter, felt something shift in him. Something quiet and heavy and very old. He'd spent his life not saying things, not reacting. The patience of a man who had watched his mother flinch from too many sudden movements and learned, early, that stillness was a kind of safety. But standing there listening to Robert Marsh threaten a good doctor who had done nothing wrong, in order to control a woman who had already been through enough, he felt it. The deep, cold anger of someone who understood exactly what was happening. He reached over and ended the call. Clara looked at him. James has everything he needs, Eli said. His voice was steady. Robert Marsh doesn't know yet what he's walking into. She searched his face for something. Heat, aggression. The volatility that raised voices always used to precede. She found none of it. Only certainty. You're not afraid of him, she said. Not a question. No, he said simply. I've never met anyone who wasn't afraid of him. He's a man who uses fear because it's the only power he has, Eli said. Once you take the fear away, there's nothing left. He picked his coffee back up. You hungry? I was about to make lunch. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. It was the laugh of someone who was slowly, haltingly, beginning to believe that solid ground might exist. Yeah, she said. I'm hungry. The storm came again in late March, not as savage as the first, but enough to knock the power out for 2 days. May had come back by then. May Holloway, Eli's housekeeper of 12 years, a woman of 62, who had taken one look at Clara on her first day back and said, "Oh, honey," in a tone that communicated an entire biography of understanding, and had proceeded to treat Clara like a daughter without being asked and without ceremony. The three of them spent the outage by the main fireplace. May brought out every blanket in the house. Eli got the wood stove going in the kitchen and kept the pipes from freezing. They ate by lantern light. A stew May had made that somehow tasted better in the dark, the way food always does during emergencies. Clara sat with her legs stretched out and her hands on her enormous belly, and for the first time in weeks, she looked relaxed. Not managed relaxed. Not performing relaxation. Actually, at ease. May told stories about the ranch in its earlier days and Eli's childhood, and how he'd been the solemnest boy she'd ever seen, but how he'd always been kind. Always, she said firmly, even when he was 5 years old, he shared his things without being asked. And Eli sat across the room and pretended to be very interested in the fire. He's embarrassed, May told Clara in a loud stage whisper. I can hear you, Eli said. I know, said May. Clara was laughing. A real, unself-conscious, surprised laugh that filled the room. Later, after May had gone to her room and the fire had burned down to coals, Clara and Eli sat in the almost dark and didn't say anything for a long time. The wind moved against the windows. The baby moved against her hands. She watched her face change when it happened. That small private miracle she'd never quite gotten used to. You can feel her, Clara said softly. I know. She's been moving a lot tonight. A pause. I think she knows something's different about this place. She looked at the fire. I do too. I keep waiting to stop feeling it. Feeling what? Safe, she said. Like the word was fragile. Like she was handling it carefully. I keep waiting for it to go away. It doesn't have to, he said. She turned to look at him in the firelight, and something passed between them. Something that had been building slowly for weeks. Gathering the way snow gathers, not dramatic until suddenly it's everywhere. She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. But when she fell asleep in the armchair an hour later, he got up and put a blanket over her and went to stand at the dark window. And the thing in his chest that he'd been carefully not naming was past the point of being unnamed. He was in love with her. He had been for a while. He just hadn't let himself look at it directly. He wasn't going to do anything about it. She'd been through too much. She'd been through enough. She had a baby coming and a legal battle ahead and an entire rebuilt life ahead of her. And the last thing she needed was the weight of his feelings. He'd sat with things in silence his whole life. He could sit with this. But he stood at the window for a long time. The false labor happened on a Sunday. He heard her through the walls, a sharp, controlled intake of breath, the kind where you know the person on the other side is trying not to make noise. and he was up and at her door in under a minute. "Clara." "I'm fine." Tight voice. Controlled. "I'm coming in unless you tell me not to." A pause. "You can come in." She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands braced on the mattress and her forehead damp. She looked at him, and her face did several things at once. "I don't know if this is it," she said. "The contractions are there." He already had his phone out. He was already calling Dr. Vasquez. The doctor's calm voice on the other end of the line walked them through it. Timing contractions, the difference between Braxton Hicks and real labor, what to watch for. Eli relayed everything in a steady voice, while Clara breathed through the pressure and watched him with wide eyes that slowly calmed. It was false labor. The contractions spaced out and faded within the hour. When it was over, Clara lay back on the bed and pressed her hands over her eyes and exhaled like she'd been holding that breath for months. "I wasn't scared," she said. "I want you to know that. About having her, I mean. I've been scared of a lot of things, but not that." "That's good," he said. He was sitting on the chair he'd pulled to the bedside, forearms on his knees, watching her. "I was scared you'd panic," she said. "I was scared of having to manage someone else's fear on top of mine." "How'd I do?" She looked at him. The ghost of a smile. "You didn't panic." "No," he agreed. "You're very calm," she said. "You're the calmest person I've ever met." He thought about that. "I had a lot of years to practice being calm," he said. "Didn't always come natural." She turned to look at him. Really look, the way she'd been doing more often lately. The measuring replaced by something softer. "Thank you," she said, "for being here." "I'll be here when it's real too," he said. "If you want me to be." She held his gaze for a moment. "I want you to be," she said. He nodded once. And then he said get some sleep and dimmed the lantern and went back to his room. And he sat on the edge of his own bed in the dark and put his face in his hands for just a moment. Not from grief. From the particular weight of caring about something so much it takes your breath. He came on a Tuesday, which Robert would have chosen for exactly that reason. A day with no ceremony, no drama attached. A day that said this is business. May spotted the black car coming up the long drive before Eli did and said, "Low and warning company." And that was all she needed to say. Eli was already at the window. He told Clara first, calmly, as he always told her things. "He's here," he said. She stood up from the kitchen table, and he watched the old fear come flooding back. The bracing, the held breath, the marble face. 3 months of slow, careful healing, and one black car on a driveway could pull the rug out in 10 seconds. That was the architecture of what had been done to her. "Listen to me," he said. He was looking at her steadily, not moving toward her, not commanding, just present. "You don't have to see him. You don't have to speak to him. You can go upstairs, and this can be handled without you in the room. Your choice." She looked at him. Then she looked at her hands. Then she looked at the window where the car was pulling up. "No," she said quietly. "I want to be there." "Okay. I want him to see that I'm not." She took a breath. "I want him to see that I'm not afraid." She was afraid. They both knew it. But she was choosing to stand in the room anyway. And Eli knew the difference between the two things, and he respected the second one deeply. "James is 5 minutes out," he said. His lawyer. He'd called him an hour ago on a hunch. "How did you know?" "He's the kind of man who picks a Tuesday," Eli said. "On purpose." The doorbell rang. Robert Marsh didn't knock. He rang, once firmly, like a man who was accustomed to doors opening for him. Eli answered it. Robert Marsh was handsome in the way expensive objects are handsome, polished, well-maintained, arranged carefully. He had the smile of a man who had used his smile as a tool for so long it had stopped reaching his eyes. He was wearing a coat that cost more than Eli's truck. "Mr. Calloway," he said, like they'd been introduced. "Mr. Marsh. I'm looking for my wife." "She's not your wife," Eli said. "Not anymore. That's the position of her legal representation as of last week." A micro pause. "I'm afraid I'm not aware of any." "Clara," Eli said, without taking his eyes off Robert. She appeared at his shoulder. He felt her before he saw her. The shift of presence, the steadied breath. She was holding herself very straight. Robert's expression did something complicated when he saw her. Not love. Not relief. Control reasserting itself. "Sweetheart," he said. Warm, perfect, practiced. "Don't," she said. Her voice barely shook. "You look well," he said. Like she hadn't spoken. "I've been worried. We've all been worried." He glanced at her belly with an expression that Eli cataloged and filed and would not forget. "Clearly you've been well taken care of." "You should speak to her attorney," Eli said. "Not to her. I'm speaking to my wife." "You're speaking to a free woman standing on private property," Eli said. "And you're welcome here, expired 10 seconds ago." Robert looked at him. Really looked, for the first time. Recalibrating. He'd expected the large property, the money, maybe a man with a temper who could be provoked. He hadn't expected this. The absolute stillness. The absence of heat. The kind of calm that didn't need to prove itself. "I have legal rights here," Robert said. "That child is my—" "James," said Eli. James Whitmore's car had come up the drive while they were talking, and the man himself was walking up the porch steps with a briefcase and an expression of professionally courteous implacability. "Mr. Marsh," James said pleasantly, "I've been hoping we could have a conversation. I have some documents you'll want to review." The short version. Ms. Marsh is filed in 2 jurisdictions, and the documentation of the last 4 years is, he paused, selecting the word, substantial. Robert's smile stayed on his face. His eyes went cold. "Whatever she's told you." "The documentation includes medical records," James said unruffled. "From 3 different hospitals across 2 states, going back 4 years. Pattern of injury, pattern of treatment, all helpfully compiled." He tilted his briefcase slightly. "Your lawyers are very good, Mr. Marsh. But the evidence is what the evidence is." Silence on the porch. The winter air moved between all of them. Clara, at Eli's shoulder, let out a breath so controlled it was nearly inaudible. He heard it. Robert looked at her. Something passed through his face, the mask slipping, just for a moment. Not love. Not even anger. Something uglier. A man who had always won, who had always been the one with the leverage, looking at a woman who had somehow gotten away. "This isn't over," he said. "It is," James said pleasantly. "Legally, it very much is. Would you like to discuss the terms of the settlement, or shall we do this before a judge?" What happened next was not a dramatic confrontation. There was no shouting. Robert Marsh was too controlled for shouting. He looked at Eli one more time, the long, measuring look of a man accustomed to finding weak points, and found nothing that helped him. He went back to his car. He drove away. Clara stood on the porch and watched the car until it was gone, and then she sat down on the porch step right where she was, because her legs had decided they were finished. She sat there with her hands on her belly and her head down, and Eli sat down next to her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of another person if she needed to. "That's it," she said. "That's the first round," James said honestly, coming to stand above them. "He'll try again, through lawyers. But Clara," he crouched to her level, "with what we have, he won't win. Not custody. Not anything he's trying for." She looked at him, then at Eli. "You said you'd handle it," she said. "I said we would," Eli said. "James did most of the work." She shook her head slowly. "I've been so afraid of him for so long," she said. "I forgot that afraid isn't the same as powerless." "No," said Eli. "It isn't." She reached over and put her hand over his, just briefly, just a moment, a deliberate touch, something she chose. And he stayed perfectly still and let her, and didn't say anything at all, because some moments don't need words. The real labor started at 3 a.m. on a Thursday. This time, there was no question. Clara knew before she even got to the doorway, came to his room and knocked, already through the worst of the first fear, already managing, already in the particular kind of focus that he would later describe to May as magnificent. "It's time," she said. He was dressed in 45 seconds. The drive to Crestwood was 20 minutes of Clara breathing through contractions with her hands flat on her thighs and her eyes closed, and Eli driving with a steadiness that was just who he was, and neither of them talking much, and the mountains visible against the sky in the particular deep blue darkness of 4 a.m. Dr. Vasquez was there when they arrived. She looked at Clara and said, "Good timing," and took over with the brisk competence of someone who had done this hundreds of times, and Eli stood outside the room and wondered if now was when he should leave. Clara, being wheeled past him, reached out and grabbed his wrist. "Stay," she said. He stayed. What happened next was 4 hours long and would take him years to fully process. He stood at her left side, and she gripped his hand, and he did not tell her she was doing well or that it would be fine. He knew those weren't the words she needed. He just said "I'm here" at intervals, or said nothing, or talked her through the breathing when she asked him to. And he was so completely focused on being present for her that he didn't have space to be afraid. Internally, of course, he was terrified. She didn't know that. Nobody needed to know that. He filed it away behind the wall of steady exterior that had been his whole life's practice. And he stayed present. And then, at 7:14 in the morning, on a Thursday in April in Crestwood, Wyoming, he heard the first cry. Small and enormous at the same time. The way the most important sounds usually are. Dr. Vasquez said, "Clara. She's here." Clara was crying before the baby was in her arms. Eli watched it happen. That transfer, that first meeting, those two people seeing each other for the first time. And something happened inside him that he had no name for. It wasn't a small feeling. It was not a feeling that could be filed away or managed. He turned slightly toward the window and pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. When he turned back, Clara was looking at him over the top of her daughter's dark, damp head. "Come see her," she said softly. He came. The baby was 7 pounds 4 ounces, perfect, outraged at the cold air, the most alive thing he had ever seen up close. She had Clara's dark hair and an expression of profound indignation at the state of the world. Clara held her out. "You can hold her," she said, "if you want to." He had held babies before. Not many. He took her with both hands carefully, one at the head, one at the back, and settled her against his chest. And she looked up at him with the ancient, unfocused gaze of the very new. And he stood there in the early morning hospital light, holding 7 pounds of miraculous life, and felt something that had been locked in him for years come quietly, completely loose. He didn't cry, but it was close. It was the closest he'd come in a very long time. "Hi," he said softly to her. To this tiny person. Clara, watching him from the bed, pressed her fingers against her lips. Her eyes were wet and soft and warm. "Her name is June," Clara said. "I decided last week. June Eli Marsh." She paused. "I hope that's okay." He looked up from the baby. "You don't have to," he started. "I want to," Clara said. "She was almost born in your snow. She was almost lost in a storm, and you found us. That means something." Her voice was steady and sure, the voice of a woman who had learned to say what she meant. She should know that. Her whole life, she should know that. He looked back at the baby. June Eli Marsh. Outraged and alive and beginning. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Okay." 6 months later, the ranch was a different place. May said so openly regularly, to anyone who asked. The house that had been too large for one man had become the right size for something. There were yellow curtains in the kitchen that Clara had made herself painstakingly, in the hours while June slept. There was a baby swing on the porch. There were toys in places where ledgers used to be. June Eli Marsh, 6 months old and of extremely decided opinions, had learned that Eli's beard made an interesting sound when she grabbed it and would do so at every available opportunity. He bore this with the same equanimity with which he bore everything, except that May swore she had seen him laugh 3 times in the last 2 weeks, which was 3 more than the previous decade combined. On a warm July evening, Clara sat on the porch with June on her shoulder, watching Eli come up from the barn in the long golden light. He moved the way he always had, unhurried, contained, easy in himself. But there was something looser in him lately, something she recognized because she felt it in herself. The slow thaw, the body remembering how to be at ease. He came up the porch steps, and June lunged for him immediately, making her particular you sound, which was apparently the highest compliment a 6-month-old could bestow. He took her with both hands and held her up and said, "Traitor." In that flat way, he said things that were actually gentle, and Clara laughed. They sat on the porch together while the sun went down, June between them and the mountains going gold, and the horses moving slow and dark in the evening pasture. "I've been thinking," Clara said after a while, "about staying." A pause. "Permanently. I know we haven't. I know you never asked me to, and I don't want to assume." "Clara." She looked at him. "I've been thinking about asking you to stay for 4 months," he said. "I've been working up to it." She stared at him. "You have." "It's not a fast process," he said, with complete seriousness. She laughed, the easy, unself-conscious laugh she'd slowly gotten back, the laugh that was all hers again. June startled from it, and then laughed too, in the inexplicable way babies laugh at things only they understand. "I want to be here," Clara said. "I want this to be where she grows up." She looked at him carefully. "I want more eventually. When we're," she stopped. "I'm not rushing. I know I'm still figuring out who I am outside of all of it." "I know," he said. "There's no rush. But I want you to know that I see you," she said. "Not just what you've done. You, the person." She reached over and put her hand over his, the way she had on the porch the day Robert left. Except this time she left it there. "I love you, Eli. I thought you should know." He looked at her hand on his, then at her face. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know. Same." She shook her head, smiling. "You're going to have to do better than same." "I love you," he said, simply, the way he said everything that mattered. "You and June. I've loved you since you grabbed my hand in a blizzard and didn't let go." She held his gaze. The sun was fully down now and the first stars were showing, and June had fallen asleep against Eli's chest, boneless and profound, the way babies sleep when they feel completely safe. "She doesn't know anything about the storm," Clara said softly, looking at her daughter's sleeping face. "She'll only ever know this. The ranch. The horses. You." "Good," Eli said. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, carefully, like she was making a decision. He didn't move. He just let it happen, the way he'd learned to let all the good things happen, slowly, without rushing it, trusting that what was real would hold. The night came in soft and warm and full of crickets, and the mountains stood dark against the stars, and in the rocking chair on the porch of a Wyoming ranch, a woman who had nearly frozen to death in a blizzard 6 months ago sat with her daughter, and the man who had walked a mile through a storm to find them. Clara had spent years afraid that safe was a place that didn't exist for her, that kindness always had conditions, that she would always be waiting for the other shoe. The other shoe never came. Instead, there was this, the warm weight of a man's shoulder, a sleeping daughter, summer in Wyoming, slow and golden and real. The storm that had nearly killed her had led her home.